Part 20 of my Micro-Armour figure gaming hobby series will be covering small-scale scenery from Brigade models. I need to point out that I'm in no way associated with this company in any manner and simply am someone who purchases their figures. So this is absolutely not an ad for their product. Instead, I'm covering how you can use these figures for built-up areas on a playing area while using either 6mm or 3mm figures, and how this may be actually a superior solution than using 6mm buildings with multi-bases, two-part bases. This shows the Brigade Models home webpage. I must admit being a bit nervous purchasing from this site, as the site is distinctly jury-rigged. However, I have to say it worked, and as long as you are happy with dealing with PayPal, which allows credit card purchases, I can't complain too much. The product took a while to arrive compared with other stuff I purchased from the UK in the same period, but as it was shipped just before Christmas in the UK, I think this has to be expected considering the Royal Post had severe issues during this period. The specific product that this company produces I wish to discuss is their small-scale scenery, which is basically 1/1000 scale buildings. At 1/1000 scale, the buildings match the scale of the terrain rather than figures, although 3mm figures would probably match up with these buildings rather well. I also possess 6mm buildings but require a double base system in order to use them and allow for fighting in the built-up areas. This works, but I prefer my balsa wood flat-topped built-up terrain for gaming, although they look awful. I'm hoping that these figures will allow me to have a good-looking terrain with all the benefits of having a flat-top built-up area terrain system. This shows 5 elements of 1/1000 single-storey buildings. I'm still experimenting with the ideal base flock to use, but for these figures I use a 2mm thick MDF base. As there's no need to move them around nor label them, 3mm MDF bases were not required. I did consider a thinner metal or plastic base, but decided against this because they are very difficult to pick up and move around, and I probably wouldn't want to be picking these up by the figure because the figures are quite small and difficult to pick up. As with all my built-up areas, and in fact all my detachable terrain, they are felt-based in order for them to stick firmly to my flock-covered playing area. If you are using a terrain sheet, then a thin layer of rubber or double-sided tape may be better. This shows my built-up terrain from the top down. While you can build up whatever built-up areas you wish using 3cm bases, I plan on creating 6cm square and 9cm square bases, and I will probably even create 2 12cm square bases, but nothing larger. At 3cm square, there is a limited road network that you can insert into the base. I use this X arrangement in most cases, but I also use a corner and a single road base as well, as some of the houses are too long to fit in some of the corners. A larger base will allow me to try more complex arrangements. However, there are some restrictions you need to consider when using a larger base. This is why I like these figures. As long as all the buildings are approximately the same height on the base, and there are sufficient to allow an element to sit firmly on top of them, the system will work. So when creating a larger built-up area base, I need to ensure each 3cm square portion of that base is the same height and the buildings arranged in such a manner to allow for the element to sit on top. This does not mean I cannot mix 2-storey or 3-storey and 1-storey buildings. It just means that for each 3cm component, they should all be one floor type. I use this basic philosophy for all my terrain, as you can see with these woods. The terrain scale matches the playing area scale, which is typically about 1/1000, as indicated before, and as long as the terrain allows for elements to be placed on top of it, you do not need any complex multi-base solution or movable flock or movable buildings or any of this sort of stuff. Not saying that latter solution is not acceptable, it's just that I prefer to have a solution of this nature because it's easier to game, and as long as I can make the terrain look as good as possible, why not go down this particular path? Let's go through the building range available from this company. I will not be covering the entire range of buildings, only those which are suitable for my system. However, some odd buildings which I think are interesting will be covered nonetheless. The English Village has 2 one-storey, 12 two-storey and 2 three-storey buildings. This is a good choice if you're building up a 6 centimetre built-up area. But as you can see, there's not enough one-storey and there's not enough 3 stories to create a 3 centimetre square. So you'll need to buy 2 packets of this if you want to end up with an even number of buildings and on your basis. The English detached houses is a reasonable choice if creating a 9 centimetre square built-up area. There are a mix of 2-storey and 3-storey houses here, so you can and they're all evenly arranged. So there are 4 3-storey and 16 2-stories. So you only need to get a single packet and you end up with an even solution. Remember, a 6 centimetre square base will probably require a maximum of 12 figures, although some of these buildings are quite long, so would basically take up a whole length of 3 centimetres. So you could probably get more than the number of bases that you would initially think from this set. However, I generally think the buildings are a bit too large for 3 centimetre square bases. The medieval town buildings, unfortunately, is not a good choice. I do like the style of the buildings, and I probably will purchase a packet and use whichever ones make sense for me. But apart from that, this is not a good solution because the building heights vary wildly. Unfortunately, even though I liked the walled farmed selection, this is also not a particularly good choice for my solution and are not suitable to put elements on top of. But I may pick up a couple of packets and I may consider using these with a multi-base setup. Because they do look kind of nice, it's just that it's difficult to put elements on top of because the highly variable nature of the height of the buildings. The Mediterranean Village is an acceptable range. It gives you a good range of different heights ranging from 1, 2, 3 and 4. Although the windmill may be a bit of an issue. The single 4-story building is also an issue. You would probably have to get, possibly 2 or even 4 packets of this to end up with an even number of buildings to fill up your bases correctly. The Normandy Village is also a good selection if you're going to create 6 centimetre square or 9 centimetre square buildings. You can even do a couple of 3 centimetre square buildings. There are an odd number of buildings, like 7 1-storey and 13 2-stories, so you'll probably have to get a couple of packets in order to have an even number. But some of these buildings are quite long, so they could occupy the entire length of a 3 centimetre square, so maybe that's not so much of an issue. I do like these buildings, and I certainly will purchase a couple of packs of them. The American Civil War buildings are probably not a good choice. All my Civil War figures are basically 15mm, and these 1/1000 scale buildings simply do not match 15mm figures. But if you were using 6mm Civil War figures, then this may be of some value. There are a couple of odd heights, such as the church, etc., but you can get a reasonable selection of 1, 2-story buildings to make up some bases for your 6mm American Civil War armies. The Eastern Front Village is my sweet spot figures. This is probably the most useful set of buildings from Brigade models. Because I am basing these on standard base, which other elements are then placed on top of, the height, as we've indicated before, is extremely important. There are 1 3-story building, which is a bit of an odd one, and I'm not quite sure what to do with that, but there are 4 2-story, which is perfect to create 1 3 centimetre square, and there are 15 1-stories, which possibly is not suitable, won't create 4 bases, but I've purchased a number of these packets in order to cover my bases in an even manner. I'm mainly deciding to focus on these figures, which is actually the figures that you saw at the beginning of this video. The German post-war village is probably my second choice of figures that I'll be mainly focusing on. There are 11 one and 9 two-stories, so you would probably have to purchase as many as 4 packets, and I probably will. And these would be good for simulating built-up areas in a more developed part of Europe. My Russian village is ideal for the Eastern Front, but maybe not so good for a built-up area in a more developed part of Europe. The Dark Age dwelling is a rather odd choice, but if you're going to recreate a World War I African army, which I'm sure almost no one is considering, then these may be suitable for African villages. But really, where they're most useful for me is in simulating Mongolian dwellings if I wanted to have a Japanese versus Russia scenario. And I am planning on building up armies in that area because I find the early war period between Japan and Russia quite interesting. Probably 45 is a little bit boring, but certainly in 39 it's definitely a very interesting conflict possibility to gain. The European city buildings, which I initially had great hopes for, and I purchased an awful lot of these figures, but in retrospect I wish I did not. These are made of resin and they're rather large. There's certainly nothing wrong with that, but they're only useful if you're going to be creating a huge built-up area, which I'm not really planning on doing. There are 5 different sets of these buildings. This is the corner set of the building set. This is the straight building set, which you can place in between the corner positions if you so desire. And this is a mix of the straight sections, but also T-sections if you want to do a little bit more elaborate building layouts. Look, if you're building a very large built-up area, these probably are quite good, but as I indicated before, I don't really intend to have a scenario which involves fighting in the streets of Berlin. The other subset are the round and the other set that goes with this. Now I know that London's got something like this, and I know this used to be quite common in pre-war Germany, so once again it's something you can use. These are the straight sections which go with your rounded sections. I'm not quite sure how they differ from the other straight ones, but anyway, they are. When I saw Roman buildings, I got quite excited. Not quite sure why, because quite frankly these are really not very useful unless you have a 6mm Ancients army, which surprisingly enough I used to, but no longer. Maybe I'll reconsider it. If you do possess a 6mm Ancients army, then you must have a legionary barracks, and that can be also provided here. The Vietnamese village obviously can be used to recreate Vietnam, which is not really an area that I want to build up armies or play games, but this may be very useful for Pacific War scenarios, perhaps Malaysia, Philippines, Borneo, Papua New Guinea, etc. As I indicated at the beginning of the video, I've not covered all the figures, and there are some really nice figures like the Colosseum and all sorts of interesting odd things like this. But unfortunately they're probably less than useful for my built-up area system where elements need to sit on top. They're probably more useful if you have a 6mm army and you're going to use the detachable base system with them. Denken Sie daran, immer für Heil, Heimatland zu kämpfen.